Now, I certainly don't think that anybody that was being rational or realistic went into the 2024 season thinking the Tennessee Titans were going to do anything big or spectacular. No way. Just, you've got a new coach, bad roster. Oh, by the way, Derrick Henry's gone. And you're starting Will Levis, who got some action the previous year, but not a ton, right? And that's what this season was going to be all about. Well, I will give credit where credit is due to the Tennessee Titans. If you're going to suck, go all the way with it and remove any doubt. If you're only going to win 3 games, make sure you only win 3 games in a manner and method and way that ensures that you get the number one overall pick in the draft. Like, nothing worse than being a team that sucks, but then still finding a way to squeeze out 5, 6, 7 wins. You're not putting your franchise in a position to change its trajectory quickly by doing that. The Tennessee Titans, by finishing with the number one overall pick because they tied for the worst record in the league and won the tiebreaker, yeah, they're on the clock. That's the way to fucking do it. Although the way to not do it is what they've done the past couple of years, and ownership, just the whole situation has been really stupid, right? You have this big kind of mini power struggle between John Robinson, the general manager, and Mike Vrabel, and you fire John Robinson. Then you hire Rand Carthon, and him and Vrabel don't really see eye to eye. Vrabel's kind of like, I don't think he's ready to be a general manager. You shouldn't hire him. They hire him anyways, and then they send Mike Vrabel packing. And then they fire general manager Rand Carthon after like 2 years. Like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, the Titans are a pretty bad organization at this point. They aren't at the lowest of tiers, but they're certainly on the second tier of suck, that's for sure. And you could sit there and say, well, don't be too over dramatic. Hey, at the end of the day, they ended up with the number one overall pick because they sucked this year, right? It wasn't a total shit show, but it was pretty close. They did beat Miami and Houston somehow. Don't ask me why. Positive news, big acquisitions for them in the offseason. Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley had 1,000 yards rushing and receiving respectively. So a couple big additions, even on a bad team, played pretty well. The Titans defense was second against the pass, second overall in total yards allowed. Although I will always caveat that by saying, hey, the reason you were in part so good against the pass was because hardly anybody had to throw on you a lot because they were always ahead. They could play it safer to the vest. They didn't have to go after it as much. So, let's be real here. And the bottom line is the mayonnaise man, Will Levis, stunk. He had too few highlights, way too many lowlights. I don't know what else to tell you, right? Taking sacks, just really bad Levis boners. Levis gonna Levis kind of thing, right? And while he would occasionally put up a big play here and there, it wasn't enough. And then, head coach Callahan sits there and benches him in favor of Mason Rudolph, and it's kind of this back and forth throughout the year. And the reality is Mason Rudolph really wasn't any better statistically, and I would argue he was barely any better overall, which, again, is just a really dumb thing to do. The whole point of the season was to ride it out with Will Levis. And it wasn't like they were benching Levis to play Rudolph because Levis was severely hurt or they thought that Mason Rudolph was going to assist in the tank. They thought Rudolph was better than Levis, which is just stupid. He wasn't really any better. And even then, you look at their defense, 6 games where they allowed over 30 points, although some of that you could point to Levis and his boners. They were 30th in points allowed. Thematically over the course of the season, this is a defense that gave up a lot of points, even if they didn't give up a ton of yardage. So in the offseason, they've hired Mike Borgonzi from the Chiefs front office, where he was their assistant general manager, to be their new general manager. So how ideal is this situation? You fire a GM, bring in one to then fire a coach, to hire a coach, and that GM is then fired, and now you're bringing in a GM to pair again with a coach that he did not hire. Seems less than ideal. That said, though, Barganzi does inherit some nice building blocks on that defense, such as Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry and L'Jarius Sneed and Amani Hooker. Not bad, right? Like you can have a competent quality defense around those pieces. And you look at them offensively, Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, you got a couple of nice skill players there. You've invested a couple first round picks in the offensive line and guard Peter Skoronski and tackle J.C. Latham. So there are some foundational pieces here. And for the Titans, they go into this offseason, they have over $50 million in cap space to spend as of right now. And one would have to assume that they are going to be big buyers in the wide receiver market, whether that be T. Higgins or Chris Godwin. It's got to be one of those guys, doesn't it? They've got to go after one of them because Treylon Burks has been an epic bust. Sure, you've got Calvin Ridley, but what else do you really have on that receiving core? Let's be honest. They need another weapon. And especially if you're going to bring a young quarterback into the fold, you've invested some in the offensive line, you got to get another weapon, right? Like, this feels so freaking obvious to me. You have the cap space, go make it happen. They could also target a starter for the offensive line and a starter or two for the defensive front seven. Be curious to see how they choose to allocate this cap space that they do have. And they probably wish they had more of the 80 to 90, $100 million range, especially for as bad as this past season went. But at least they're not over the cap and sucking, right? That would be the Cleveland Browns. I think beyond question, it has to be this way when it comes to the offseason. As I mentioned, with going after a T. Higgins or a Chris Godwin, offense has to be a priority, and it certainly needs to be for the draft. And with the Titans sitting at pick number 1, you could sit there and make some type of pitch of going in a different direction at quarterback. No. You have to do everything you can over the next several weeks to evaluate which quarterback do you feel more comfortable with. Is it Cam Ward or is it Shedeur Sanders? And if it's either one of them, you take them number 1 and then you build the fuck up around them. Point blank. No trading down. No sitting there thinking about taking a Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, some bullshit like that. You are at number 1. You are the Titans. You clearly don't believe in Levis. He showed enough to show you that he's not the guy. Henceforth, you need to move on now. And the way you do that is by drafting a quarterback in round 1 with pick 1, and you make a statement as a franchise and say, this is going to be the guy. This is the guy that we're hitching our wagon to. And whether you think that Shedeur is the pocket passer or Cam Ward is more of the toolsy, talented kind of dual threat guy, the Titans front office, Barganzi, head coach Brian Callahan, they need to figure out which one is their guy, and that's the one they got to rally around. As I mentioned, though, quarterback alone ain't going to fix this. They need a wide receiver really badly. They could also use some young offensive line depth. And, when you look at the way the Super Bowl played out, right, and you talk about what the Eagles were able to do and what the Chiefs weren't able to do, even if you say for a team like the Titans, well, they've invested first-round picks the past couple of years in Skoronski and Latham, that's fine. You can invest more day 2 premium picks in the offensive line, especially if you're going to build around a young quarterback. Like, if you're going to overinvest in an area, overinvest in the trenches. Teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles have invested heavily in the trenches, and you would even sit there and say for the Chiefs, well, they've invested heavily on the interior of that offensive line and it worked, but the tackle position has been a bit of a problem the past few years. Meanwhile, the Eagles have heavily invested in both sides of the trenches, and it was a big reason why they won the Super Bowl. This team could also use a higher end kind of tight end talent. A good safety blanket, as always, for a young quarterback is to have a tight end in the intermediate area. And I think in terms of their defense, they could use some more depth and talent in their linebacking core. If you want to say, hey, you've got Landry on one side as an edge rusher, that's fine. But what do you got in the middle there? Feels like you could use a little more. A couple of positives here for the Titans. One is that while they sucked in 2024, it's not like they're in a whiz-banger of a division. There is always that possibility with the cap space, especially go out and get a big target. You draft the right quarterback. Build around them. Like, this could be a relatively quick turnaround. When I say quick turnaround, hey, you could go from first overall pick to 9 or 10 wins. It is not inconceivable because there are some pieces here. There are some pieces. But boy, they better hope they get the quarterback call right. And once they draft that quarterback, you have to anoint him and you put everything behind him. None of this wishy-washy. We're going to sit him on the bench and he's going to watch and learn. That's fucking dumb. Don't do it. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, those are your options. Figure everything else the fuck out after that.